What if I told you the US government once experimented on human minds without permission, without warning, and then destroyed most of the records? You're not watching science fiction. This actually happened. And the truth that we have now is only what survived. Welcome back to Jess Curious, the podcast where we explore conspiracy theories, ancient mysteries, suppressed history, and unanswered questions. I'm Jessica, and if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button as it helps more curious minds find the conversation. Tonight we're stepping into one of the darkest, most unsettling chapters of modern history. Tonight we are talking about a program once officially denied, then partially admitted, then quietly buried beneath shredded documents and redacted pages. This episode is about the most disturbing chapters of the Cold War, a program called MKUltra. Not as a horror story, not as a certainty, but as a question. What really happened when intelligence agencies tried to control the human mind, when fear becomes policy, and how much of that story are we still missing? I've always been drawn to stories that live in the uncomfortable space between this sounds impossible and this actually happened. I've always personally wondered, how did people not see what was happening? MKUltra sits right there because unlike many conspiracy theories, this one isn't pretend. Some of it is documented, some of it is admitted, and some of it disappears right where the questions get interesting. Tonight I won't tell you what to believe, but I will walk you through what we do know and where the story goes dark. To understand MKUltra, we have to rewind not just the years, but the mindsets. It's the late 1940s and early 1950s. The world is still bleeding from World War II. The war has ended, but the fear hasn't. Nuclear weapons exist now, and a new fear replaces the old one. It's not invasion, it's influence. The Cold War started not with bombs, but with ideas. The United States fears the Soviet Union fears the United States, and both sides fear something even more unsettling. What if the enemy could control minds instead of borders? Reports started circulating that the Soviet Union and Chinese forces are using brainwashing techniques on prisoners of war. American prisoners return home different. Some confess to crimes, some praise communism, some appear mentally broken. Were they forced? Was it trauma or something more? In 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency officially started. On paper, the mission is simple. They're supposed to gather information, protect national security, and prevent another surprise attack. But beneath that mission is something darker. The CIA isn't just watching borders or tracking weapons. It's trying to predict the future, to see the threats before they exist, to understand not only what an enemy might do, but how they think. By the early 1950s, that focus begins to shift toward the human mind. This is where the word brainwashing enters the conversation, and the question becomes unavoidable. If the human mind can be controlled or broken or reshaped, then the United States must understand how, so they don't fall behind, so they don't become weak, and so that they don't lose a war that might be fought quietly inside the mind. MKUltra was an illegal CIA research program officially authorized in 1953. The program was overseen by Allen Dulles, director of CIA at the time. Dulles believed that the Cold War would be won not just with weapons, but with the mind. And under him, MKUltra quietly began. The goal wasn't necessarily mind control like in the movie sense. It was scarier and more experimental. They wanted to find out whether human behavior could be altered, disrupted, changed, or broken under certain conditions. Not all at once, not cleanly, but piece by piece. They used people as the actual test subjects, and these people had no idea they were ever part of the program. One of the main figures behind MKUltra was Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist who believed the mind could be changed chemically. He used LSD, a drug made by Alan Hoffman. The CIA ended up buying the entire supply of LSD from Hoffman for about $240,000. In today's world, that's about $4.2 million. Researchers wanted to know, could LSD change behavior? Could it make people more gullible? Could it cause confusion, fear, or addiction? Could it change memory or even identity? In some experiments, subjects were given LSD daily for weeks or months at a time. In others, it was given without their knowledge, slipped into drinks, food, cigarettes. The reaction was different for everyone. Some people reported being very happy. Others experienced paranoia, panic, disassociation, or long-lasting depression. From the CIA's perspective, these unpredictable changes became part of the research. If a substance could change the mind even unpredictably, even just a little bit, then it might still be useful. Another branch of MKUltra focused on hypnosis, deep, long sessions designed to test how gullible a person could become, whether false memories could be put into the mind, whether people might start doing things when they hear or see something after being hypnotized. Some experiments even combined hypnosis with drugs, trying to see if adding the drug made subjects listen better or more controllable. According to declassified summaries, researchers explored whether a hypnotized subject could be made to reveal classified information, forget entire conversations, perform actions they wouldn't normally choose. The results were mixed, but the research continued. One of the most disturbing areas involved was sensory deprivation. People were placed in isolation tanks or rooms with no light, no sound, and so small they could barely move. The theory was simple. If the brain is starved of ideas long enough, the mind will be easier to control. Some people lost track of time, others were hallucinating, some became traumatized after just hours. The experiments meant that even healthy minds can break without activity, a finding that is now used for interrogation techniques worldwide. So the next time you're asking yourself, how can someone innocent agree to something that they didn't do? Just remember the techniques they are using. I would call it torture. You might call it something else, but it's made to break a person's mind. Another line of research focused on sleep loss. Subjects were kept awake for long periods, sometimes days, while researchers watched. They had mental breakdowns, mood swings, hallucinations, health complications. Sleep deprivation didn't need drugs to work. Exhaustion alone could cloud judgment, memory, and identity. Some experiments even happened in apartments. CIA ran safehouses in New York and San Francisco. Ordinary people were brought in, mostly men, seduced by women. The women also were unaware of what was really happening. Drinks were poured, and some were secretly drugged with LSD. Agents watched behind a two-way mirror, but this operation had a name called Operation Midnight Climax. Yes, that was the real name. Some of the most controversial MKUltra linked research focused on electroshock therapy, a treatment that did exist to help with severe depression and psychosis at the time. And that matters because MKUltra didn't invent electroshock. What it studied was how far it could be pushed and to what effect. In certain experiments later connected to CIA funding, electroshocks were reportedly given more often at higher dosages combined with drugs. The questions researchers appeared to be asking wasn't, can this help someone heal? It was something more evil. Can we cause enough brain problems to change them? Some psychiatrists believe that if personality could be broken down into its most basic pieces, like memory, habit, mood, then it might be possible to rebuild it differently. This idea was called depatterning. The goal was not recovery, it was reset, to change the mind. Individually, none of these methods were new. What made MKUltra different was the combination, the stacking of stressors. Taken together, these experiments show researchers weren't trying to create obedience in a clean, controlled way. They were testing limits and crossing lines. How much stress does it take to break identity? How strong is memory under long interruptions? At what point does a person become easily convinced, not because they agree, but because they're exhausted? This part of MKUltra isn't disturbing because it proves mind control worked. It's disturbing because it reveals a willingness to treat the human mind as something you can just throw away. They were not trying to heal or help anyone. They were trying to break them. MKUltra experiments weren't a single lab. It didn't stop at US borders. Cold War intelligence acted as a network. The United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom shared research information, funding options, classified priorities. There was at least 149 known subprojects scattered across universities, hospitals, prisons, military facilities, and private research institutions. Many researchers didn't know the CIA was even funding them. The funding was often routed through front organizations to hide the agency's involvement, and many participants believed they were part of a legitimate medical or mental health study. They never agreed to these experiments. Some never even knew what had happened to them. Psychiatrist Ewan Cameron worked at McGill University, Allen Memorial Institute, a respected medical institution. Cameron believed that he was helping mental illness. He used sensory deprivation, heavy sedation, repetitive audio messaging, and electroshock therapy. He said that his work was therapeutic. Years later, investigations revealed that his research had been funded through CIA-connected channels, without patients being informed of the true sponsor or the reason. Cameron didn't see himself as part of the mind control program, and that's exactly why his story matters, because MKUltra didn't rely on villains or bad people. It relied on division. This is a system where keeping secrets is accepted, fear mixes with questions about what's right or wrong, and everyone shares responsibility instead of just one person being in charge. It's interesting to think about MKUltra program and how it used vulnerable people like homelessness, mentally ill, prisoners, and even children for these experiments. Today I see some scary similarities in what's going on in the US. What if we're seeing a new kind of mind control? Are we as a society being influenced in ways that we don't even notice? With so much secrecy, it really makes you think. Are we truly aware of what's happening around us? In November of 1953, Frank Olson, a U.S. Army scientist on MKUltra, attended what he believed was a regular meeting with colleagues and CIA. The meeting was casual, relaxed, a chance to exchange ideas across agencies. What Olson didn't know was that during the gathering, his drink had been secretly laced with LSD by his own colleagues as a part of an MKUltra related experiment. There was no warning, no agreement, no explanation. At first, Olson reportedly laughed it off, but in the days that followed, something shifted. He became quiet, anxious, disoriented. He told coworkers that he felt like he was losing his grip. He called his wife and he said something was wrong, that he had made a terrible mistake. Some later accounts suggest that Olson had begun expressing his concern with his work, mostly around the human experimentation and interrogation techniques. Whether those doubts had been on his mind before or came with the drug exposure is still debated. What's clear is that Olson was having a mental breakdown. Worried, his boss sent him to New York to talk with a psychiatrist. He wasn't sent alone. A CIA officer went with him and stayed in the same hotel as him. In the early hours of November 28, 1953, Frank Olson went through the window of his hotel room at the Statler Hotel. The CIA quickly ruled his death a suicide, and for decades that explanation stood until the 1970s, during the Church Committee investigations into the CIA. The government publicly admitted that Olson had been given LSD without his knowledge. President Gerald Ford officially apologized to Olson's family, and a financial settlement followed. But the apology raised as many questions as it answered. Why was the scientist drugged without his knowledge? Why was he under constant supervision afterward? And why were so many records missing? In the 1990s, Olson's body was dug up. A second autopsy revealed significant head trauma, injuries that some experts believe happened before the fall. Others argue that they could be consistent with the impact of a violent fall. They didn't come up with a definite answer. No charges were filed, so Frank Olson's death remains unanswered. Was it a suicide born of mental breakdown caused by his work? An accident following an unthinkable break of trust? Or something more? We may never know, but his death changed everything, because it changed MKUltra from a shadowy program into an actual human story, one with a name, a family, and consequences that refused to stay buried. And from that moment on, the question was no longer whether ethical lines had been crossed, but how far were they crossed? MKUltra was officially stopped in 1973, not because the public suddenly learned everything, but because internal concern had finally reached a breaking point. 2 years later, in 1975, Congress began investigating covert intelligence abuses through what became known as the Church Committee hearings. For the first time, government officials were forced to confess on record that American citizens had been used in secret experiments without consent. But then something something critical happened. Former CIA Director Richard Helms admitted that most MKUltra files had already been destroyed on his orders before investigators ever arrived. Not misplaced, not lost in a fire, but destroyed. What survived were fragments like budget summaries, partial memos, statements given years after the fact, enough to confirm that MKUltra existed, but not enough to fully understand what was done, to whom, or with what long-term consequences. So when we ask what MKUltra actually accomplished or failed to achieve, we're asking questions of an incomplete record. And that matters because after MKUltra ended, new programs appeared. MK Search, MK Naomi. Officially, these were meant to tighten control, refine research boundaries, and ensure intelligence agencies understood mental and chemical threats rather than recklessly experimenting with them. But critics argue the names may have changed faster than the mindset. Were these programs real attempts at change, or were they quieter continuations, renamed, restructured, and protected by lessons learned from public backlash? The answer depends on who you ask, and this is where the story stops being historical, because MKUltra teaches us something uncomfortable about the government. Not just then, but now. When fear rises, fear of enemies, fear of falling behind, fear of losing control, ethics don't usually just disappear. They get re-explained. Boundaries start to become flexible. Mistakes become classified. Pressure becomes justification. Even today, we still debate how much privacy, consent, and clarity should be sacrificed in the name of security, whether the threat is terrorism, cyber warfare, pandemics, or technology. So the real question isn't just, did MKUltra end? It's, when fear gets loud enough, who decides how quiet ethics are allowed to become? And that question, unanswered, may be the true legacy of MKUltra. So here's where I land. MKUltra proves one thing clearly. Governments have crossed ethical lines in the name of national security, but it also shows how messy, flawed, and human these attempts were. So I ask you, where is the line between protection and control? Could something like this happen again under a different name? And how much clarity do we really expect from intelligence agencies? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Message me, comment, disagree respectfully. Curiosity thrives in conversation. And if this episode made you think, even uncomfortably, consider subscribing, sharing, or leaving a review. It helps more curious minds find this conversation. Please join me for the next episode. I'll leave you with this quote: "A mind that's open to new ideas never returns to its original size." Albert Einstein. Thanks for watching. Bye!